resilience of the day. This morning was a very particular situation because I had to go live stream from a friend's house because in my family house, the whole area was affected of a power failure. So you will see that what we are talking about is extremely real and extremely practical. And again, we were talking right now for icebreaking, how much is important to develop the right relation and to take a coffee with people in our field. You always need to know who is on the other side of the phone when you need, if you are in an emergency, or if you are like in academia or in consultancy, you actually need to be sure that the people that you are relating with are willing to challenge themselves with what you want to say or what you want to learn. This morning, I was saved by the fact that these people simply were not kind of at home properly and they opened their house. One of them was actually on leave. So we managed to sort it out, but it was because of the relation. When you are in a situation of crisis, we cannot face it alone. With the infrastructure interdependency, with all the complexity we are facing now, nobody has the skills or the expertise to face everything alone. We are together in everything. And it's very important to develop the connections and develop the potential together in what we're doing. The reason why we decided to do a bit different this tester lecture, it was driven from a project that I'm having with Savina of Arup. And it was something important that we discussed too. We wanted to share our learnings and what we connected together working on some projects, and a project in particular together. And we wanted to share with you, opening to our prospective students and the people that want to start right now our masters, but also opening to our colleagues in the practice field, so both the public and private sector, consultancy, and simply to share our learning, share our mistakes, and providing two different perspectives on critical infrastructure resilience and the role it can have right now on decision making. So I'm very happy that Savina agreed to participate. She's associate director in the infrastructure advisory practice at Arup. She is an infrastructure practitioner with a background in major rail and road projects, specialized in infrastructure advisory, helping infrastructure clients to future-proof and make smarter use of assets, data, or processes. In particular, her work focuses on infrastructure resilience, asset management, and technology advisory. As part of the Resilience Shift initiative, she leads work on guidance tool and standard for resilience, aiming to catalyze a shift from theory to practice. If you don't know me, instead, I'm the director of the Master in Risk and Disaster Resilience. I have a focus area of research on emergency planning, business continuity, organizational and operational resilience. I try to do blue sky thinking and publishing in like classic academic peer-reviewed paper, but also I try to make it practical, interacting with people like Savina or with my friends and colleagues, local government or international organizations. So for how I see it, it's a process of learning from each other. Today, we have organized it in two complementary steps. First, I will start with a presentation, bringing the academic perspective, have some minutes for a fast question and answer, but if you can, keep it for the end because there will be a Savina presentation that is recorded, and then she will join us between meeting at the end, and we'll dedicate more questions to answer your doubts or your ideas at the end, so we can interact together. It's something that is, even this morning has been very interesting, and all the time we are doing it, it gives a lot of new idea and new potential to collaborate. But again, the point of what we are doing is that nobody has the single answer. And this is a chance for us to relate also with all of you that are following, with our students, because each one of you can have a role in what we are doing or can have a potential in the field. So again, welcome to all of you. I hope you will find it very, very interesting, or unless not bored to death. And I look forward to interacting with you in terms of questions, in terms of points, or in the future, in terms of feedback, also negative feedbacks. So I will start to share my screen with the presentation of the first part of the lecture. And just to be clear, we learn from technological failure, This morning, I had a couple of technological failure. It always happens for this. And this is exactly why talking about infrastructure resilience is more essential than ever for the sector. So it should be. I hope you are seeing me. Okay. I hope you are seeing me, and I will start. So the first part of the lecture is on decision-making for infrastructure resilience, and I will present the mad scientist perspective. Savina will give you more an overview of her point of view on practice and how our work can interact together to create something new. So the way I will bother you in the next 15 minutes, first, I will explain complex events and how those can challenge decision-making for infrastructure resilience. Secondly, I will provide you with evidence from our project, our data collection, and how we interacted with our stakeholders. And finally, I will give you my point of view of why interfacing with practitioners is vital for our work. And possibly you can have a role of it on it sooner or later. We can interact. And again, we are in all this together, and nobody has the expertise to understand everything on their own. But let's start from the basics. So we are talking about infrastructure resilience, but what are critical infrastructure? Well, following IRDR definition, we are talking about the physical structures, facilities, and networks, and other assets which provide services that are essential to the social and economical functioning of a community or a society. Well, in other words, they are not just building, right? They are nodes of function. They are social, organizational, and technological constructs. So think about a road. Do you think a road is just a road? What are the points you have to consider if you're a decision maker in assessing that road or understanding the road? Example one, think about that you are in central London. During business as usual, no COVID. You're working in the city of London in the financial services. You have to be there. There is traffic. Well, I guess that roadblock that is in front of you and the crossroad, it becomes a very important access if it's the only access to where you are going and there are no alternatives, right? So think the same crossroad in time of COVID when everybody is working from home. Well, you may have the same issues, but also not, right? Think about how it changed the relevance of the same crossroad in a simply different situation or even day and night. And then think another example. This morning, I was in my friend's house. I'm actually in Parma, where they make all the Parmigiano Reggiano cheese and Parma ham. And it's a very lively and industrial reality. However, in the area where I was this morning, there is a production of cheese, right? Is very, very important, essential. And there is one road with one bridge, a very small and secondary road. If you pass from there, you will never understand the relevance. In that case, though, it might be the only way for a big production factory to proceed in production. And how many people may be impacted if there is an interruption in that road. And you see that the small secondary road in the countryside that on a superficial view, you will never think about, it becomes super important. This actually happened some months ago with one bridge. And bottlenecks that were created in a production area because it was the only bridge for miles. Nobody was caring before. So again, when you're taking decision-making, when you're considering perspective, both short and long term, what is a critical infrastructure? How are you going to assess it? And what is the role of what we are living today when just walk a road? The point is that disruption to critical infrastructure can cause cascading events. It means to say you have a punch that can be flooding, can be storm, but the point is not the problem, just the punch. It's the backbone, our lifeline of supply and functions. The critical infrastructure that gives you electricity, communications, transport, ICT, that if they're down, they may amplify the primary impact of the first event, but also become critical events on their own. Or in some cases, you may have that those critical infrastructure can become hazards on their own, meaning like nuclear power plant and meltdown, like what happened in Fukushima. So thinking in perspective, and think how COVID-19 and the pandemics we are living is relevant for all that. How critical infrastructure are essential today. So we have our primary response that is extremely under stress. We need to be sure that everybody has an hospital bed and the emergency response can relate with it. Well, but it's not just that. Think about it. What we are doing now. What emergency services, people that work in the councils or even business continuity planner in most cases do? Well, they had to work remotely, right? So there is another role for communication and also electricity compared to before. And think about these two things. How do they relate if something else is going on? Like if you have a concurrent event, like the one we are seeing, for example, with the wildfire in California, or the summer we saw this summer with heat waves, with flooding, with storms, or this winter maybe with cold weather. How your decision making is going to change when you consider the complexity of this scenario. And then think again, when you start to think like that, are your priority in terms of prevention and mitigation of disruption the same? Well, I'm sure that you will start to consider more, for example, things like cyber, hybrid threats like fake information, and everything that will affect the technological side and your capacity to keep things going. Not just on what we were used to traditionally think in terms of needs for emergency planning and management, but also how we keep things going and how society is dependent on these aspects. Again, this morning, as I said, I had to change completely my plan B, working remotely from Italy, to go in another place because of power failure. I had to have in place a plan C in case of a disruption and so on. Think about how much this can affect your everyday life and consider that. So exercise. Think about you are in charge, for example, an emergency facility, a fire station. You are somebody in the fire brigade and you have to have bulletproof a fire station. Or you are in the NHS, you have some hospital you need to keep going in this moment. Well, for sure, you will consider the primary punch you're going to see. So cyber attacks, geomagnetic storms like solar flare, heat waves, and all that together. And then you will try to create, to avoid the disruption of operational continuity. So you will try to be sure that whatever you see will stand, to avoid that your own disruption have implication on society. However, you have also to be sure in this assessment that is not just the primary threat, because the same problem you can have may also affect other critical infrastructure sector. So you can be disrupted, but your colleague can be disrupting more than you and affecting yourself. Like think about again a power failure in which your key personnel cannot arrive to the workplace, or simply your phone is down. In the moment you plan and you take decision, you have to consider all these aspects that are interdependent and network together. So this is not always a matter of rocket science. So the solution and the implication of all that are not necessarily overcomplicated. Let's do a test. And I see you all don't try to copy. So first question, do you ever experience a prolonged blackout? Well, in my case, this is a yes, this morning it was 6 hours. But I guess all of you, if you think it through, this is not like a low probability impact event. Many of you already experienced it, even if you were in the UK last year, in the summer, and so on. If you are in it, whatever, you most likely experienced the last one. But remember, what are you considering as a trigger? Okay, sign it down now. Second point, do you have a working landline telephone? Well, my family house here, yes, we have it. My parents are used to it. This is a big house. Yes, my friend this morning, no, they don't use it. They have just Wi-Fi. My friend is a head of ICT security for a big cooperative. They don't have it. They're not used to it. Myself in London, I don't have it. I never perceived the need to do that before starting to study what I'm studying. However, mark it down. Do you have an old-fashioned battery FM radio at home. Not the one in the smartphone. And here you will start to see how cultural behavior, age groups, and how we are grown up can change. If you're grown up, like for example, in the US, in an area subject to storm, most likely you have it. If you are a youngster of 19 years old, you have no idea, you just have the smartphone. If it's me, I started to buy that after I worked on power failure. And think about even another thing, stock of cash. So this is extremely interesting. Every time I do this question, the answer is really depending by who is the audience. If I am in a meeting with the professional of the sector that are quite old and experienced, they all have cash, all of them. While I found myself that despite all the good purposes in London, I never have it. What happens if I move to Italy? Every time, what happens is that I'm used to go around in London cashless, and I find myself that I cannot pay because in most of the places here, they are still not accepting it for small transaction. So you see that things like age group, culture, geographic location, and also policies make the difference in all that. So it's all things that you have to consider in your decision making. And then, if you remember, put down which was the trigger you were thinking about. Well, I hope we all agree that was a cyber attack, right? Well, it's not really like that. The first time I wrote this slide, I was partially affected by the risk of a power failure, but it was in central London, and the problem were squirrels, evil squirrels. Then I checked it out because it was so strange. And then I saw simply that in the US, for example, in 2016, there were 3,000, nearly 500 outages just in the United States of America. And if you're interested, check a beautiful website called Cyber Squirrel. There is a map, unbelievable. But the core point, if you take it that, think about what you were marking first. The point is this is the behavior of this cat. So we tend to focus always on the primary trigger of the event, while the problem are the vulnerabilities we are experiencing and how we translate that in day-to-day action, planning, or decision-making. If we were assessing properly, if we are seeing them or not. In operational term, there is a typical issue. You are prepared because you believe you have a generator, but you have the contract for a generator. You didn't check which is your role in the priority list. So maybe you are the bottom line. You don't have the generator. Maybe the provider had it in Saudi Arabia. Maybe you didn't simply thought about gasoline, or the person you trained is stuck at home because of a transport failure, and he was used to, or she was to use public transport. So as we are seeing, the implications for decision-making are many. And the first point that we need to consider is that it's difficult to visualize all the effects, and it's very difficult to prioritize the actions. So we are talking about highly interconnected cross-sector interdependency. So it's very hard to visualize them. If you start to look from the top, one thing, the other are all interconnected together. So how you're gonna tick the list of what is first? Are you gonna do it alone? Who is gonna help you? Then the second point, we collaborate always with colleagues, for example, in local authorities that are extremely willing, smart. They sacrifice themselves for the well-being of their borough, for example. However, one person is doing the job of 3 people. They're trying to help, trying to understand and learn from, and we try to learn from each other, but their time is limited. And they have priorities they cannot go past. And the other point is that when we talk about critical infrastructure interdependency, it's very easy that this is immediately becoming a hot topic. Try to think what happened when in the US they came through that they were preparing for Black Start event. That is common sense for me. Immediately somebody started to put information about conspiracy theory and so on. So when we talk about the disruption of our lifelines and supply, well, it's very easy to get lost and having the public getting very anxious for a reason. There is the conflict between short-term and long-term planning. So short-term, for example, preparing for an emergency and keeping things operational, and then thinking about investment for example, climate change adaptation. This is a struggle that we are still seeing. The things do not match while they are part of the same problem, and they have to address the same vulnerabilities. The last point on that is that there is another tendency to do silo thinking. For example, in our field, academics, they don't talk to each other, but then it goes on. For example, infrastructure provider, they cannot share data or cannot simply think about putting themselves together with other sector, or simply departments that work on emergency planning and business continuity don't talk with the climate adaptation one or the facility management. Different languages, different barriers, and the complexity required that we are all together. So some evidence from our research, and thank you very much to London Resilience, the London Climate Change Partnership, for all the support they give to our work during the years. So the data I'm talking about is a research we published in 2018 about the perception of cascading interconnected risk in the Greater London, in the London Resilience Partnership. First thing, we saw that the participant to our research had the awareness that essential services can impact and imply risk of life and personal safety and security. However, it was also extremely clear that this was not prioritized enough in decision making. So that's actually a problem. You are aware of it, but still is not enough. Similarly, there is awareness that critical infrastructure failure can become more common because of climate change, but there are just moderate attempts to integrate longer-term drivers in planning and business continuity, unfortunately. Correlated to that, understanding medium-term impact can be in constant with short-term priority. So short-term priority means we have budget cuts, we need to keep things as usual. We have actually to solve the problem, the first one we see, but we cannot address the root causes of the vulnerability can stack us during time. And this is a massive problem. And finally, as we focus on primary threats, there may be lack of cross-sectoral coordination, missing the information, for example, that we need to deliver to the public in case of operational failure. So think about how things are going to be communicated if you cannot access Google. And I know that each one of you accessed Google Maps at least once this week, or maybe somebody not, but I did 5 times even just today. But how the dependency on technology and infrastructure changed all our behavior, societal and organizational, and how decision-making have to do that. Finally, we did recently a project with Arup for the Greater London Authority to improve decision-making on critical infrastructure and resilience. And we had a lot of lessons learned that can be applied in this case also to the other project and to stakeholders, to your teaching at large. In case of Greater London, there are a lot of progresses. The Greater London Authority is really committed to improve everything. And this is an extremely good thing. But there are some things that we learn from this case that are definitely can be applied to everywhere, or mostly everywhere. The first point is that critical infrastructure resilience requires the development of new training and consistency in it. So the complexity required a different way to visualize, train, and keep constant the way we can share this information and this education. There is still the struggle to clarify benefit allocating resources, but this is a very huge problem because providers take their decision often on cost benefits, or simply they have to be sure that their investment will come back 3 or 4 times. We can support decision-making toward gap analysis, assessment, and prioritization. So this is extremely useful though. This is a point where as academics and practitioners, we can actually make the difference. Once we support the prioritization of resources and the assessment of what is missing, we can actually make the difference and change everything. So for our student next year, think about how can you use your thesis to do something like that, for example. And the core final point is that what is often needed is a mix of solutions. There is not a solution fit all. That is not true. We have needs, but the way we need to adapt what we are doing, it depends by the context, by the organization, and the culture we are facing. The role of academics in that, well, we are mad scientists, as you're saying. Our role is, first of all, for how we see it, asking a lot of questions. We ask a lot of questions. We challenge everything. But the way we're doing is that we make hypotheses, we test them, and we challenge the assumption. In other words, we exercise critical thinking, and this is extremely important also for the people we choose to interact with and for our students. We use critical thinking to ground our ideas and developing a vision. So informed decision-making. The data brings you to consolidate the vision of the direction where you are going, and overall, in the long term, to change what is not working. I personally think that is essential for us to domesticate our creativity. So how we do question, how we take the question with rationality. So it's not a process where we just have to apply the scientific approach, but it's also an interaction where we use critical and lateral thinking to see beyond what has been done and to see above the complexity of interdependencies. In conclusion, I believe that is essential for us to bridge academic and practice. First of all, because from my experience, I want to learn and listen to what has been done for real. When I do Blue Sky, I want to learn what are the real needs, because ideas can generate change, make impact. After all, both us, our partners in the public and private sector, we're still doing it because we care about it. It's important to talk with colleagues in the public and private sector because this is challenging our vision. It's like we start from Blue Sky, so something like really there, and instead interacting with them, we can actually build an umbrella for the rain, so something that can be useful. In all that, everyone can have a role. So please, even in the next presentation and the next day, ask yourself what is yours as students or our colleagues that are listening to this talk in the future, and do get in touch. We are always there and we are always happy to collaborate. And thank you. So I will see if anybody has urgent question. Otherwise, I will start to activate Savina's talk. And here it is. Okay.
Greetings all, and thank you, Gianluca, for giving me the opportunity to share my practitioner's view on decision-making for infrastructure resilience. I will start the presentation with a few basic concepts on infrastructure resilience. I will follow with some thoughts on decision-making for resilience and what the blockers may be. And I will conclude with my views on how academia can add value to practitioners and vice versa. Existing infrastructure systems are increasingly complex and interdependent, spreading across national borders and continents, and more reliant on sophisticated digital technology. This creates vulnerabilities, and these systems are under pressure from a range of big global issues such as population growth, urbanizations, or climate change. Therefore, infrastructure must be prepared for the threats that we can anticipate and respond to those we cannot predict or avoid, so that it continues to provide essential services on which society depends. And resilience has a key role in this. Resilience means different things depending on the scale we consider. Resilience involves bidirectional, multiscalar relationship. For example, the resilience of a particular infrastructure system in a city depends on the city system and vice versa. Conversely, the city system depends on and influences resilience at national scale. And resilience at national scale, or lack of resilience, disruption, and failure of national systems can have global ramifications. Consequently, resilience is increasingly being considered as a critical agenda, as well as better understanding of hazards and taking action to mitigate risk. We need to also build the resilience of infrastructure, cities, communities, to withstand a wide range of hazards that are not necessarily predictable. Resilient infrastructure is more than just a bridge or a power station. It is about how all of our infrastructure is connected together and the interdependencies between all of our systems and services. Significant investment is already planned to address infrastructure deficits globally and to repair and retrofit existing infrastructure systems for a changing climate and digital age. However, an infrastructure gap still exists. Rapid urbanization in developing countries will require considerable investment in new infrastructure to meet the increasing demand. This creates an enormous opportunity to plan and build infrastructure systems so that they continue to function under many circumstances, and if they fail, they do so safely. But our infrastructure is not always fit for purpose. On the slide, there is a list of the challenges that infrastructure practitioners face, and more could be added to the list. Given the unprecedented scale, complexity, and uncertainty of the challenges that are ahead for our infrastructure systems, we need to move from a traditional risk management approach to resilience. But we should not disregard the importance of risk management approaches as a fundamental component. One of the things to think about is the balancing act that we're always facing between the different drivers of decision. We need to think about those factors that are driving decisions currently and where those decisions may not be taking account of resilience. Looking at the boxes on the left of the screen, these are what more typically drives decision in the world of critical infrastructure. So, for example, thinking about the short-term impact, dealing with the known risks and known problems, thinking about individual assets, and the traditional cost-benefit approach, as opposed to the things on the right-hand side that we might want to consider for the resilience, which would be the wider system, how we deal with the unknown unknowns, taking the long-term point of view. Systems may be physical things such as energy, infrastructure, roads and bridges, housing and shelters or ecosystems, or they may be non-physical processes, practices or behaviors, such as code and standards, culture, community cohesion, or social relationships. This makes decision-making for system resilience even more complex. I personally like this network science approach to illustrate in a simplified way the complexity of decision-making for resilience. So there are three domains. The first one is the physical domain that includes the real-world networked infrastructure systems. The second domain is the information domain, where information exists and flows, and it is at the intersection between the physical and the cognitive domains. And the cognitive domain is where decisions are made, and it comprises intangible assets such as knowledge institutions, as well as individual and collective consciousness and perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs. On the slide, I've added some of the blockers from a decision-making perspective that from my experience I've observed against each of those domains. These include data gaps, lack of standards and guidance on how to use data and information to make decisions, fragmented and confused landscape of tools, and then also capacity gap, unclear value of what resilience can deliver, an enabling environment that does not encourage inclusion of resilience in decision-making, and 5-year funding cycles that make investing for the long term difficult. A challenge for critical infrastructure is breaking down silos within and between infrastructure sector. For infrastructure practitioners, the life cycle is a useful way to think about entry points for resilience. I find that the value chain, which is normally a concept that is used in business, is helpful for connecting the concepts of resilience and value across the different parts. Resilience value is different for different stakeholders, and this value needs to be articulated to all for any significant change to occur. Infrastructure resilience matters, whether you are in government developing policy, whether you are an investor looking for a return, or an engineer responsible for the design, construction, or retrofitting of safe infrastructure, or if you are an asset operator ensuring continuity of service, or a business concerned about continuity of a supply chain. An important and exciting initiative that is making a difference is the resilience shift. The Resilience Shift is supported by the Lloyd's Register Foundation and is hosted by Arup. It is helping to build a global community equipped with the knowledge and the tools needed to drive a practice towards better, more resilient infrastructure. This initiative is doing excellent work focusing on tools and approaches to put this shift in resilient thinking into practice, identifying the drivers and enablers for infrastructure resilience, and advancing a common understanding of resilient system. The Resilient Shift does this through influencing policy, shaping practice, and sharing learning. To find out more about the Resilience Shift, please check it out on resilienceshift.org. On this slide, we have 10 insights for resilience that capture what matters for resilience in infrastructure from the work done by the Resilience Shift to date. The Resilience Shift did work looking across the range of policy and standards that play such an important role in how decisions in infrastructure planning, development, and management are made. This table shows policy and standards that range from the more coercive instruments to then on the left-hand side to the instruments that are more reliant on voluntary action on the right-hand side. On their own, standards are voluntary, have no legal status and no requirement for compliance. However, a standard may be cited in legislation or written into a commercial contract and thus become mandatory. So usually it is a mix that is chosen, so mix of coercive mandatory instruments, the sticks, and then the carrots, so the incentives, tax and user charges, government bonds as an example, to the sermons, so there are information instruments, to the then voluntary actions taken by businesses to do the right things. Resilience tools can be useful for a wide range of practitioners, but it can be hard to find the right tool for the job. The Resilience Shift has assessed a wide range of tools and mapped them by the resilience value that they add at different stages of the infrastructure life cycle. Information of the over 70 tools collated in the Resilience Toolbox is available at the link you can see on the slide. I would like now to quickly present a couple of real projects on the topic of infrastructure resilience that Arup has undertaken in collaboration at UCL. The first one is about infrastructure and digital systems resilience. The National Infrastructure Commission appointed Arup and UCL to explore the trend towards digital infrastructure systems from a resilience perspective. The study highlighted the need to balance the benefits of digital technology, such as efficiency and speed, with awareness of the vulnerabilities that increasing reliance on digital systems can create. Infrastructure systems are already complex, highly interdependent, and tightly coupled. Overlaying the systems with digital systems is already prevalent and will become more so in the future. This will further increase complexity and will probably create new emergent properties that we do not yet fully appreciate. In this context, evidence suggests that not all accidents can be avoided, and focus should be on the adaptability, flexibility, and recovery properties of systems and organizations to mitigate the impact of such normal accidents. The other project I want to mention is very recent, and Gianluca has already talked about it in his presentation. From my perspective, the exam question that the GLA has asked is excellent and very relevant to many government authorities, infrastructure owners and operators, who are wondering how consideration of resilience and interdependency in infrastructure decision-making can be done and improved in practice. Our work shows that the answer to this question is a combination of solutions that range from capacity building, for example, convening cross-sector workshops that facilitate identification or management of interdependencies, policy interventions, such as lobbying regulators to push for resilience assessments and reporting, much much as what is already doing, and using digital tools to facilitate secure exchange of data that can then in turn improve decisions around, for example, prioritization of interventions for critical assets. To conclude, I'd like to share a few thoughts about bridging academia and practice divide. I think academia has a key role because they're forming the next generation of infrastructure practitioners that need to be very conversant with the role of resilient and sustainable infrastructure in supporting our communities and society, and the challenges that our infrastructure systems will face. The field of applied research is particularly helpful to accelerate practice, and areas that I see particularly useful are, for example, advanced data processing and analysis, risk modeling, system dynamics, social research, behavioral science, but there are many more. I think the cross-pollination between academia and practice is essential and is beneficial because it pushes the envelope on novel ideas and ways of thinking for both parties. At Arup, we have established strong links and collaborations with academia. We very often deliver projects with academic partners, and we greatly value their input and expertise, particularly around bringing new thinking to the table, as well as adding rigor and validation to our work. Thank you for listening. That's all for me. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to the discussion.
So we are back. Hi, Savina, and thank you for joining us even this afternoon.
Hello.
I know that you are super busy, and that's very important for us that you are here even now. If you want to have a laugh, we started today's conversation talking about the role of coffee for our work. As you know, is something that we discussed a lot too. So I will say, is any of the participants willing to have any questions? Please let us know in the chat. Otherwise, I will start to bother Savina as usual with my own. So let's start for that. I will say, what is for you the role of coffee and spending time with people for your own job and for the infrastructure domain? I was explaining today at the beginning of this session that is, to me, is one of, call it building block of how we do things. But that's my point of view, clearly.
Okay, coffee as in drinking coffee or having a coffee with others. I guess that's a different thing.
In academia, I would say, take me out the coffee for one day and my productivity level will go below ground.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
I was talking about how it's important to create the relation and how this is essential for sharing information, in particular in the infrastructure domain. It actually started casually because we started a bit earlier the live stream, so we started to chat.
Okay. Yes, so definitely collaboration is key. So as I was saying, I think in the presentation, we tend to work in silos. So I guess, you know, like picking up on your coffee example, you know, just even a coffee chat to then kind of share thoughts and then start maybe identifying opportunities to collaborate. That would be of great help to implement what we're trying to do, because, you know, as you will have gathered from the presentation, the challenges that we face are quite complex, and this is not something that we can resolve alone. So like any collaboration, I suppose overcoming fragmented governance, so again relationships between organizations, within the same organization, relationship with different stakeholders across the infrastructure life cycle. So all of those relationships are absolutely key, because, you know, the people are basically making the decisions that then influence what happens in real life to a certain extent, because then, you know, like there's a lot of things happen in real life that are outside our control.
Yeah, and in all that, how you see that your personal experience can vary between the cultural and societal domain of the partners or the stakeholders you are dealing with. My own experience, I was mentioning slightly this morning, is that I cannot relate in the same way for respect or simply because the needs are different here or in the UK or with other partners across Europe, including a friend of mine that is in Poland dealing with flood risk in Poland. So how do you see that? My personal experience is that can be very challenging, but adapting the messages and the way we even humanly relate is an essential part of all the process.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of a recent project that I've done. Most of my work has been in developed countries, but in December I undertook a mission with the UN ops in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and my role in that project was capacity building. So I was helping the local road agency to build capacity in asset management with a, I suppose, added resilience element to it. So like obviously in Bangladesh, they experience flooding and, and that's something that they're trying to mainstream, say, climate resilience into their practices. But, I did find perception of risk was quite different. Safety, the way to communicate messages to them was like definitely the difference that I saw is that I had to bring it to very simple, tangible examples. Otherwise, the message would just not land. Whereas, like in a different context, like in a completely different context, for example, UK clients, they're very well sort of educated in a lot of these topics. So the conversations are perhaps they stay well. They sometimes stay at quite sort of complex, elaborated, and quite theoretical level. Whereas, like what I found in Bangladesh, it was like to be able to transmit, I guess, that sort of technical messaging was a bit more of a challenge, and I had to use a different tactic. So using very simple examples in real life. And one thing that was a very surprising for me is that risk management wasn't an established practice. So perhaps they would manage risks, say, for example, flooding risks in their own way, without having I suppose, a structured process to manage their risks. So like they had identification, assessment, mitigation, and then go back and reassess and implement. So that was just not there, and it was part of, in fact, was the key thing that I did during my time there.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. So I experienced a bit the same, depending on who I dealt with in my research. I mean, again, I'm doing a particular research because I try to make it practical. So the way I dealt, for example, with the small local civil protection on the Adriatic Sea and the way I had to relate with them, I had the communication code and the kind of like, way to connect, but they won't have answered the same way to my former supervisor because they were considering him like, a bit too much academic to deal with and a bit too much pretentious. Instead, they were people that were very hardworking. Not all of them had degrees. Some of them actually had elementary degrees. So but they worked all their life and they were committed for their community. So they were kind of scared of being kind of stigmatized by, the big academic that arrived from the university. And if nobody is having question and answer, so you are all shy, I have a big one for you to discuss from this morning that I was thinking it through. And all of you that are attending, be very careful. We are both Italian. We can go on like that forever. Okay. Evelina shared the question just in time because, but you're not gonna say what I have in mind. If not now, later. So has COVID-19 revealed any unexpected gaps in resilience planning? That's a good one. For example, from my perspective, I started a new job in May, and while the company was totally ready to have everyone working from home, what they discovered is that there was a world shortage of laptops. It took them 5 weeks to send one to me. I'm guessing they weren't expecting that. Up to you, otherwise I start.
I know you're passionate about this topic. you can start.
Considering my son. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are lots of consequences that they highlighted. The first of all, what emerges is that many organizations were supposed to have BCP, but they didn't update what is called business impact analysis. So they knew that some things were coming, but they didn't prioritize for real, which were the critical services that were essential for keeping the organization running. So, for example, there were hiring freeze, or there were issues related to the availability of resources that hit the wrong department, for example. This is an example that can be applied to different organizations I'm aware of. And this is what I want to say. So you have a vulnerability, and instead of protecting it, so you actually expose it, because the assessment process is a bit superficial, or is wrong, or is simply done with goodwill, but not necessarily done in the right way. So that's why we are also supposed to planning, and that's the role of business continuity and organizational resilience. That is something that often, in this case, we saw how much often is underestimated. The right plan, even if it's just one page, with the right prioritization, can make the difference where you are locating the resources and what you are keeping running. And is what makes the difference in how fast you are recovering. Other things, there were many others. I will release soon a research with the European Commission where we know that gaps in resilience planning are associated with fake information and the management of fake information, for example, for personnel. Other example can be associated to the backup plan of having people working with ICT at home and not having a secondary option. So the example again of this morning, I was lucky that I had friends that hosted me, and I could have done part of what I did with my phone as a backup already provided there. But for example, I discovered yesterday that I didn't have enough giga to have it. So the first thing I will do when I'm back in the UK next week, I will have another 50 gigabytes extra from a provider that I'm not sure what is, to be sure that whatever happens, I can keep operational in case of a call, in case of whatever. But we are seeing that things are vulnerable. The other things that for me was being critical until now is that many organizations still didn't recognize concurrency, the possibility of concurrency, until when it came up on the face. I had colleagues in the US that were mentioning that like in March, and we did research that in like 2018 and before. So things happened at the same time, and it's not like a worst case scenario. It actually happens all the time. We simply are not used to see it. And then I could go on forever, but Savina, please.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a few points. So like thinking about how the COVID-19 has impacted different infrastructure sectors. So obviously, Gianluca, you mentioned comms, reliance on comms, that's become a lot more apparent. And you also mentioned in your question, the laptop, so something like comms related. The using more energy, I guess, everyone working from home, like, so we've got consumption of energy patterns changed. So definitely, like it's been, more stretched perhaps, and water perhaps as well, like more usage. I've read somewhere more usage of water. So certain sectors have been stretched. Certain sectors such as transport, obviously, I've just seen a decrease in use, basically, of transport networks. So what I'd like to say here is just at the flip side of this, seeing this as a bit of an opportunity. So we've seen during the COVID-19, like what that can be doing to transport. We've seen that our travel patterns perhaps can change, like we probably don't need to commute as much. Perhaps we can just, we're more pushed to walking and, do active, say, travel solutions because of the COVID-19. So the opportunity here is that I'm not really that hopeful the level of transport will not go back to what they were before the COVID-19, but there is a little bit of a window of opportunity to perhaps, I suppose, embed some of the changes, because some of the changes for the transport sector were not all bad. And in my day job, I also look at travel demand management, which is something that is pretty much influencing people's travel behavior through interventions. That could be a social media campaign to just let them know when to travel. So that's quite simple, and people who live in London, we're used to this. Incentivize, for example, use of bikes, carpooling, modal shift away from cars. So like, in terms of the travel demand management side of things, you know, the fact that the COVID-19 sort of made us stop and think, I think that was a bit of an opportunity to see whether we can make a different use of transport, a more intelligent use of transport, and perhaps, you know, like we will retain some of the changes in travel pattern that we've experienced during the lockdown through, for example, more flexible working or remote working, which is I think is beneficial for a number of reasons, you know, like optimize, I suppose, capacity of transport, perhaps increase use of public transport, as I said, away from cars, and active travel, which is beneficial
Savina,
also for health, well-being. Yeah, sorry.
I missed one sentence. You had a moment of gap.
My last sentence. Yeah, so I was saying, I think I was making the point about the benefits of, for example, the very last sentence was about active travel and the benefits that this has also on our well-being. So being able to just cycle and walk to work is something that if we've made any change during COVID-19, it would be something good to keep doing.
Yeah, and I want to follow up on this point, because when we are talking about resilience and organizational resilience in particular, the point is always that this kind of situation can help us to change what we are living and make it more sustainable, or simply evolve it. We are seeing that some of the lessons learned that we are taking can actually be probably a structural change in how we're going to do things in the next 10 years. But again, when it comes to decision making, it's really essential that we take the chance as citizens, experts, and colleagues to actually ask to our decision maker to go on a certain path and direction. I mean, we think how even just how the pollution changes in central London or here, well, these are actually good things. I mean, we can actually change things for the better way in these cases, or some gaps we have seen even in my home region here in Italy in terms of coordination. Well, we learn from that. We change it to be more prepared to whatever is coming next. And we are talking about both things that we can expect that are in risk register, like indeed was pandemic, but also things that we are not on the monitor. Because when we invest and we work hard to change the vulnerabilities that we have seen, the gaps we have seen, well, the more we do it, the more it is likely that we are better prepared for whatever comes next. They are predicting it or not. We are simply change with the way we are doing things.
Yeah, so like just to maybe to conclude, because I think we're ending probably shortly, but also the point of adaptation, you know, that's part of the resilience process. So like the COVID-19, obviously, I can't say we were prepared for the COVID-19, because we were not. We definitely are recovering, and perhaps hopefully we will have learned from the first wave. And I'm not sure, I'm not that hopeful actually, but anyway, hopefully we will have learned something from the first wave, and then, you know, hopefully then we will just learn some more and adapt us as elements, you know, key elements in the systems as human beings.
I will show you the data in a few days. You are gonna get a bad moment, believe me.
Yeah, well, let's just finish on a positive note.
So, is anybody of the audience have a last question? Otherwise, I think we'll let Savina go, and then I will follow up with you privately for what I had in mind. That maybe also a good idea for some project. So, anybody have a last question? I see no interaction. So, Savina, I wanted to thank you a lot for joining us even now. And it's really great to have this chat. And I hope you all in the audience enjoyed it. And please do get in touch with us if you have any suggestion, if you want to, I don't know, build a project, or if you're our students and want to do a thesis or something related to what we are talking about. I will recommend to check the material released by Resilience Shift. They have something great, for example, on scenarios for power failures, and we will make it we will forward it also via our social media very soon. So Savina, do you want to say anything else?
I suppose is if any of the topics that were presented today is of interest, I'd be happy to take any follow-up questions. And I suppose if you are students then joining the new master's starting, there's always opportunities to then take some of these ideas, if you've had any ideas, and turn them into your master's project and work with us.
Yeah. And instead, if you are colleagues from the public or private, just write me a message on LinkedIn. I try normally to answer as soon as I can. Maybe sometimes it can be some days, but we are also always happy to try to discuss how to collaborate. So I want to thank you all for being there. Thank you, Savina, for taking the time again. And I wish you all to go home safe and take care and respect physical distances. Thank you, all of you, and keep in touch soon.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.